Okay, so this is spermatogenesis. It's the process of sperm formation. It starts with the spermatogonium, a stem cell, and it enters mitosis, where it becomes a type B daughter cell. Then it grows a little bit, enters meiosis 1, and becomes a primary spermatocyte. After meiosis 1 is completed, it divides and becomes they become secondary spermatocytes. Then it further divides, they become early spermatids, late spermatids, and finally spermatozoa, which is the sperm. This section right here is meiosis, which is early spermatogenesis, and then spermiogenesis is late spermatogenesis, so early, late. And then if further you need an explanation of meiosis versus mitosis, page 1037 and 1038 in your textbook, there's a really good reference, really good picture where it compares them side by side. So this is the HPG axis. It regulates the production of gametes and sex hormones. The hypothalamus releases GnRH, which via the hypophyseal portal system reaches the anterior pituitary cells. So these release FSH and LH. And FSH stimulates the cystinocytes to release ABP, which stimulates spermatogenesis. And then LH binds to the interstitial endocrine cells, which secrete testosterone, which are responsible for the somatic psychological effects on other body sites and maintenance of secondary sex characteristics. Testosterone increased levels inhibit GnRH, and then increased or rising testosterone levels serve as a final trigger for spermatogenesis. And then inhibin inhibits FSH. It's released based on sperm count, and it serves as a barometer for normalcy of spermatogenesis. So these are the testes. They're the male gonads that produce sperm and testosterone. This is the epididymis. It lies within the testes where spermatozoa undergo maturation. This is the vas deferens. It's the duct that conducts sperm from epididymis to the ejaculatory duct. These are the seminal vesicles. They secrete semen into the ejaculatory ducts. This is the ejaculatory duct, and it conducts sperm from the vas deferens to the urethra. This is the prostate gland, and it secretes alkaline fluid. This is the bulbourethral gland, and it secretes alkaline fluid into the urethra. This is the penis. It is the male copulatory organ used to expel semen into the female vagina. And then this is the corpus cavernosum and then the corpus spongiosum. They are made up of erectile tissue containing blood sinuses, which when filled with blood result in an erection. This is the glans. It is the slightly enlarged end of the penis. And then this is the prepuce, or the foreskin. Right here is the scrotum. It's the pouch that contains the testes. And then up here, this is the head of the sperm. Right here is the nucleus. This is the neck, the body, the tail, and then lastly, down here, is the urinary bladder, which stores urine, goes down the urethra and out, just like the sperm travels down the urethra. The anatomy of the female reproductive system is far more complex than that of a male. Looking at this model of the female reproductive anatomy, we will start from the inside and work our way out. Starting with the ovaries, note that on this model, only one of the two ovaries can be seen, located here at number 1. The ovaries are positioned on either side of the uterus, with a broad ligament below the fallopian tubes. The ovaries are responsible for housing mature female reproductive cells known as ovum, and they play a role in the production of sex hormones. Next, located at number 2, we can see one of the 2 fallopian tubes, or uterine tubes. The fallopian tubes serve as a pathway to transport the ova to the uterus each month, and when fertilized, transports the egg to the uterus for implantation. Also part of the fallopian tubes is the fimbra, the finger-like projection located at number 3. The fimbra act as a sweeping motion to transport the ova along the fallopian tube. Some important structures of the uterus include the cervix, located at 6, which connects the uterus to the vagina, the isthmus, located at 7, the fundus of the uterus, located at 8, which is the entrance to the fallopian tubes, and finally the fornix of the uterus, located at 14. This is formed by the protrusion of the cervix into the vagina. Collectively, the structures just mentioned within the uterus assist in its main function of nurturing the fertilized ovum that matures into a fetus and is contained within the uterus until the fetus is fully developed for birth. Connected to the uterus is the vagina, located here at 9, and then further down the vagina orifice, or opening, at 10, both of which help with menstruation, intercourse, and reproduction. Moving to the outside of the vagina, we find the external genitalia, which as a whole unit are known as the vulva. Within the external genitalia, we can see the labia minor, located at 11, the labia major, located at 12, the clitoris, located here at 13. These external structures aid in enabling sperm to enter the body through the vaginal canal and protecting the internal genitalia from infection. A few supporting structures can also be seen on this model. The round ligament located at 29, which connects the uterus to the anterior body wall, and the ovarian ligament, which connects the ovary to the lateral surface of the uterus. This can be seen at 30. The last part of the female reproductive anatomy I'm going to cover is the mammary glands. The mammary glands are present in both males and females, however, they usually only function in females. Their main function is to produce milk in order to provide nourishment for a newborn baby when reproduction has been accomplished. The description I am going to give describes the mammary glands of nursing or pregnant women in the 3rd trimester. In non-pregnant women, these glandular structures would be undeveloped. Looking at the sagittal section of the breast, we will start with the superficial structures, the pigmented areola and nipple. Moving further into the breast, we can see the lobes separated by fibrous connective tissue and fat. There are about 15 to 25 in the mammary. Inside these lobes are smaller units known as lobules, which contain glandular alveoli that produce milk when a woman is lactating. These glands pass the milk into the lactiferous ducts, which open to the outside of the nipple. Each of the lactiferous ducts contain a lactiferous sinus. During nursing, milk accumulates here. Finally, supporting the mammary are the suspensory ligaments located between each lobe. These ligaments attach to underlying muscle and overlying tissue to provide support to the breast.
The difference between oogenesis and spermatogenesis. So what oogenesis produces is 3 polar bodies and 1 ovum. Now the ovum is the functional gamete, and this happens in females. And all 4 of those cells are haploid cells. Now in spermatogenesis, you just end up with 4 viable gametes. So now we have, when it comes to the ovarian cycle, we have 2 different main groups of hormones. We have gonadotropins, which come from the pituitary gland, and they include LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. And then we have ovarian hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone. Now, estrogen causes growth and changes, usually at puberty, but in secondary sex organs in the female. And progesterone usually makes the changes that happen before and during pregnancy. Now, the 2 hormones work together to establish the uterine or menstrual cycle. So this is the ovarian cycle. It starts with the follicular phase, which is basically a dominant follicle is chosen, and the dominant follicle has an antrum, which is like a little bubble with fluid in it, and a corona radiata, which is like the outside of granulosa cells that's tough. And then the next step is ovulation, which is when the follicle is ruptured and it exits the ovary into the peritoneal cavity. And then we have the luteal phase, which is the corpus luteum is formed, which kind of looks like a popcorn ball. And if it is not fertilized, it degenerates. If the follicle is not fertilized, it degenerates. Now, in the menstrual cycle, we start with the menstrual phase, which is when the uterine lining is shed. And then we move on to the proliferative phase, which is before ovulation, and the lining is rebuilt. Then in the secretory phase, we are preparing the uterus for an embryo to implant. And so basically nutrients are being added to the blood in the uterus. And that's after ovulation. Okay, now this is the more in-depth explanation of the ovarian cycle and the hormonal controls that go along with it. Now the hormonal controls are in blue and the steps of the ovarian cycle are in green. So we start up here with gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, stimulating the release of LH and FSH, which affects the follicles. And then it releases estrogen, which inhibits the gonadotropins from releasing. So at that point in time, the primordial follicles and FSH start to mature and start building themselves into primary follicles, then secondary follicles, then vesicular follicles, which at that point have an antrum and a corona radiata. So now with the estrogen in the bloodstream, we have the vesicular follicle, which is chosen from a bunch of different follicles to be the dominant follicle. And once we have a dominant follicle, it turns into an oocyte, a primary oocyte, which completes meiosis 1. At this point, we're having positive feedback occurring from estrogen. So the estrogen is, yes, from the estrogen. So then we have a secondary oocyte and a polar body, which the oocyte stops at meiosis 2 metaphase unless it's fertilized. And at this point, we're releasing more gonadotropins, and luteinizing hormone is going through the roof. It's surging, which is what causes ovulation. So then we come back down to ovulation. And at this point, estrogen takes a sharp decline, and we have a lot less estrogen. And a corpus luteum is formed from the ruptured follicle that happens when it exits the uterus, or the ovary. Now, we have the secondary oocyte is expelled into the peritoneal cavity, and the dominant follicle matures and then the granulosa cells enlarge, which is what forms the corpus luteum. Now we come down to the luteal phase, which is when LH stimulates the corpus luteum to secrete ovarian hormones, so estrogen and progesterone. Now the progesterone causes a negative feedback loop of the increased ovarian hormones, which inhibits the gonadotropins. So, and the reason why we need to inhibit the gonadotropins is to prevent vesicular maturation and LH surges so that we don't have another ovulatory period. Now, at this point, the secretion of the ovarian hormones is what causes the corpus luteum to either persist and stay there if the follicle's fertilized, or degenerate if it's not fertilized. So if we have a fertilized little embryo, then the embryo releases HCG hormone and maintains the corpus luteum until the placenta can take over the hormonal controls and release progesterone and estrogen throughout pregnancy. And then if the cell is not fertilized, Then we have a sharp decrease in luteinizing hormone, LH, and which also causes a decrease in ovarian hormones, which is what ends the whole cycle. And then at this point, it's once you've decreased all the ovarian hormones, it stops the inhibition of gonadotropins, so they release from the pituitary gland, and the cycle starts all over again.